Good afternoon, folks, and welcome back to Uncork's Twitch channel on this July 19th. Today, I've got a fun guest who I've worked with for quite a while in Uncork and have done a lot of work with over the years. We don't talk as much as we used to, so I'm super excited to have her on today and talk once again. And that is Dara Raskin from our Uncork digital team. Dara, why don't you tell more folks about yourself?
Sure. My name's Dara Raskin. I'm the Senior Director of Application Engineering, say that 5 times fast, in Uncork Digital, which means I run all of our application engineers that work on projects for clients.
Cool. So I guess first, I know we've got a lot to talk about in terms of what makes a high-performing codeless team, but I don't know that we've talked about Uncork Digital a lot here. I think folks just know Uncork as the platform. So maybe you can spend a minute first just saying, what is Uncork Digital?
Sure. So Uncork Digital is our professional services arm. When a client comes to Uncork and says, I want to build an app in Uncork, but I don't have people, I want you guys to do it for me. We want it to be the best app it could possibly be, comes through our team, and we get a team of architects, engineers, UX designers and engineers, engagement managers, ready to work with that client, go through what it is they want to build, how they want to transform their business, and then start designing and building the app for them and deliver them an end product.
Gotcha. And I guess it was through, you mentioned a few different roles there. It was through honing in on those roles and probably seeing tons of projects that you came up more or less with, your feelings and your strategy here around building the right team to develop codeless applications with Uncork. So I guess let's just jump into that. And first and foremost, and just to level set the rest of the conversation, to you, what is a high performing team?
So I think there are 4 things that a high performing team does really well. They're a learning organization. They are constantly learning. They are continuously creating. So they're always creating, acquiring, transferring knowledge to each other, to others that are learning on the platform or in their code base. And they're also modifying their behavior to reflect the new knowledge. So when we find out that there's a better way to do something, we want people to start changing their behavior pretty much immediately. So being an organization that not only is seeking out better ways to innovate, better ways to do things, but also changing to go with that. In the case of Uncork, the platform is always changing. There are new things, and we need to be continuously innovating how to use them. What does it replace? When do we use them? When do we not use them when we get a new component? But I think that applies to all high-performing teams, whether you are a manager of, an accounting team. You always want to be up to date with what the newest thing is. You want to be helping people adapt to new challenges all the time.
Yeah, that's so true. Like when I've interviewed so many different roles, both at Uncork and other roles, and there are a few questions or a few things I look for that are always consistent across. And the one trait that I always try to get out of people is I look for curiosity,
Yes.
right? Somebody who's not going to take things at face value. Like you said, find the better ways to do things or just new and interesting ways to do things. And it sounds kind of like that would fall in with a trait that would be good for this learning aspect of it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, and I know it's something you've seen, is there are moments where you have to deliver a tried and true solution with a group of people that just want to innovate. They want to come up with something new. They want to be doing the cool new thing. But sometimes what the client needs is something that we've built before, or built something similar. There's not a ton of innovation, but it is a solid project. It's going to drive huge value for them, but it's not going to be the most innovative. And that kind of goes into the second thing for a high performance team is you have to be good at managing and knowing when people need that innovation and they need to be on the cool new thing or need time carved out to do that. And also, when they're ready to do something that they've done before. Maybe they just came from a crazy innovative project and they need to like reset for a little bit. So understanding where somebody's at and management quality, being human to people is another, I think, huge trait of being a high performing team. If nobody wants to be on the team, it's not
Right.
high performing.
You mentioned like maybe coming from an innovative project over to something that's a little more tried and true to just maybe level set. Is that a strategy that you specifically employ as you're reallocating resources?
So it's not normally about innovative or more standard. It's very often has to look at what was going on in that project. Was it a project that needed to be done in 3 weeks and they pulled 20 all-nighters and maybe they're fried? That's a piece of it. We also look at, we want people to rotate through projects that are traditional delivery projects where we kind of take in requirements from a client and build it out with advisory projects. So projects where the client wants to build it or a systems integrator wants to build the item and you're advising them, you are helping them, you are the expert on their team. We like to switch people through both of those as well because they're different skill sets. In order to be the expert, you have to be continually delivering too. So we don't want somebody who has only been the expert for a year, right? We want them to go back and build something new or get back into what are some of the things that happened with this new component? How do we make that work? So there's a couple different things we think about with resourcing and also knowing where the person's at, right? Sometimes there's something going on outside of work that we know about and we're able to find the right project that resonates with them, whether it's advisory or delivery, whether it's in a specific vertical, working with a specific client, because it does resonate with where they're at personally in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so key because, one of the beauties of, or one of the benefits people always talk about with low code, no code, codeless architecture, they always talk about bringing the business people closer to the technology, right? But like as a technology person at heart, I always think about it the other way too, like being able to bring the technology people closer to the business, because that's going to teach them things that might help them in their day-to-day life, particularly in an organization like Uncork that deals a lot with financial services and insurance, things that maybe when you're a young developer you're not thinking about, but as you get older and you start saving for families and health becomes a consideration, having that is going to benefit you personally in many ways, but also a lot of the other skills that go around managing that is going to benefit you professionally. So it really is, I think, a bi-directional, gravitation toward the center that you get a lot of benefit out of.
And bringing those two groups together, I think also helps us in my team be better problem solvers, right? A client may say to you, I need 3 buttons on the page and they need to be in this order. And when you start understanding what it is that they want, whether working with a UX designer or working with the client's designer, you can start to figure out, hey, that's just reproducing what you have rather than building what you need. And sometimes it does take, change management people from our engagement team are experts at how to help clients through this and not just take in requirements and build exactly what they want, but really understand the root of their issues.
Yeah. I think also, like, I'll give a couple examples that I know we've seen together is, when you move people around, you're de-risking the software and you're de-risking your business, right? Because I've always felt if you kept one person on one thing all the time, that's a risk. If that person, like you said, the personal life factors into this, where people are at, like something could happen to them and now you're in jeopardy, or something like that. Like, we've had the PDF people before, and I think we both know who we're talking about there, right? Like that was the go-to PDF. And then if that person's not available, what do you do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a few things, and this goes back to being a learning organization too. We don't want to have one person that's the PDF person, and they're the only one that can do this. When that was the case, we probably had less than 10 people who were app engineers. So it was a little more common that we had people that were the expert in something specific. Now, what we're really working on as we scale the business, as we scale Uncork Digital, as we scale Uncork, is making sure that all that knowledge that the PDF person has gets written down, gets over to people who can use it, that they do lunch and learns, that they take part in. Internally, we have something called Cork Shops, which is a play on a workshop. Having them come and present, having it recorded, so that if they're out on vacation and something breaks in that PDF that they built, we do not have to call them. We don't want to call people on vacation. We want to have other people who can jump in, know the project, or can figure out the project and know the processes that we're doing because they are best practices, and can kind of go, oh, you're missing a semicolon here, right? In the generation of that transform. Or, oh, it looks like your plugin it just broke. Let's see if maybe pulling in a new plugin and reconfiguring it makes that fixed. Those types of things, and getting that written down has really been a process that we're working on for 2022. We know that there are so many things that you can do in Uncork, and there are so many ways that it's constantly changing. So getting those written down and making them in a place where it's written down, but it's changeable. So it's a starting point for us. And when somebody has a better idea or somebody has a different idea, we can talk about it. It's not just well, this was written down, so that's the case, and that's how we're going to do it forever.
Right. Yeah. So you said something in there about, and then I knew we got a couple other points on the main. I think you said 4 things. I think we've gotten through 2, but this is what we said. Yeah, we said we were gonna definitely be going off on tangents today. So you said that was when we were talking about our PDF specialist at the time.
Yes.
That there were 10 app engineers, right?
Yes.
Obviously, that's not the case today. Uncork has been growing. The number of even creators outside of the business, our organization has grown in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. But just to give people a sense of scale and the way that you've scaled this team, so that's going back, let's say 3-4 years to 10 people, right? What's the team at now in terms of your oversight?
We are at 46 engineers that are in the US, and we are working on hiring offshore as well. And by the end of the year, we will likely have 20 offshore engineers.
All right. That's quite a team you've got there these days.
Yeah, we've
awesome.
definitely grown.
Yeah. All right, cool. Let's get back to, so of the 4 things for high performing, we got through first 2. What's number 3 on?
Number 3, I would say, is open and action oriented. So we want leaders within the team and members within the team as well that are open to hearing criticism, open to hearing suggestions, open to trying new things, but also action oriented. So when they hear about something, it's not, oh, that's somebody else's problem. It's everyone's problem on the team. Hopefully they're not problems. Hopefully they're suggestions, and it's, hey, that's a suggestion that anyone can bring forward, can start working on, and also celebrating, right? We constantly in our Slack channel are looking at who got certified as a professional or an expert configurator through our enablement team, and are celebrating that. And all different people post in there, hey, I saw so-and-so got their expert configuration, congratulations. Those types of things, and being action-oriented about them means that the team feels like there's a team feeling, right? You want to feel like you're part of the team when you're working, especially remotely. We want that to feel like when you say something, everyone's listening to you, even though it's not in person. It's not somebody tapping you on the shoulder and telling you. Maybe a Slack, it may be one of 25 Slacks you got in the last 15 minutes. But we want you to be action-oriented about them.
Right. I feel like so much of what you were saying earlier about the learning and the management feeds into that one too, right? So you hear different points of view. I mean, that goes back to learning, right? And hearing those points of views and listening through them and comparing them to what you're thinking and how they can be better. And then, being someone who wants to help your colleagues out, even if it may not have been your problem or, whatever it is, that goes back to that being human and caring. So much of it feeds into that.
Yeah, and we work in project teams, right? There's very infrequently one app engineer on a project, definitely not by themselves, but even just infrequently, just one of them with an architect or a UX designer. It's very often a pod of people. So if you see something, going back to your conversation with Karen last week, if you see something that isn't working correctly, even though you didn't touch it, we want you to be action oriented. We want to build the highest performing apps as a high performing team, right? So being aware and not saying, oh, I didn't touch that, not my problem, coming in and saying, hey, I saw something was wrong. Is somebody working in this area? Are you just not done yet? Or if nobody's working there, okay, let me go see if I can debug it, or at least open a ticket and say, I saw this thing. We know it's broken. I don't have the moment to do it right now, but I need it in the backlog. Having those types of things also falls into it. So it's not just a manager hearing something from a direct report. It's a team member being part of that too.
Yeah. Love the ambitiousness and the folks who step up there. Cool.
And then the last one, which I think applies to all of them, is continual improvement. I think we've all heard fail fast forward. That is something that I want my team, I want the teams we work with to be feeling like they can do. Try something and then keep trying. If it doesn't work, ask somebody, make a left turn, be open to getting some feedback or criticism, and then make the changes, right? We have to start somewhere. We've been in a very rapid moving startup culture. So try something, and if it doesn't work, move on to the next thing, but don't give up on what the goal was. And that kind of helps us with the other three. So they kind of all come back together.
Sure. So have you seen any, again, Uncork is working with very large enterprises, and I'm sure many of our viewers are also sometimes working with, very large enterprises, or just any clients that, maybe have a lot of the shared traits of that. Do you see any, and I get the benefits of the fail fast forward, but for folks who maybe are a little adverse to the idea of fail, or that approach to things where you're maybe coming at it from again, that enterprise view, how would you make them comfortable with that kind of approach?
I think many times we time box ourselves, right? So we say we want to fail fast forward. We hope that we don't fail, but we want to know that this is something new. I'm going to give myself an hour or a day or a sprint to try it out and see how far I get. And if I'm at the end of that time in a good place, then I'm going to keep going. If I'm in a bad place where I have been blocked every step of the way, I'm going to try something else. So giving them a risk that is kind of bound, especially when we're working on client projects and they want us to be the expert coming in, know how to do everything on the project before we get started. There are things we need to try out. We need to create a proof of concept, or we need to gain access to documentation for a new integration and really play with it and figure out what exactly we can do. We may know that we can do these three things, but it would be great if we're able to do these other two, right? So giving ourselves that time box allows, especially with clients that are risk averse, for us to say, we have budgeted this amount of time to try it out. If it doesn't work, or we're halfway there and we're not done, we're going to put it aside. We're going to keep going with the project, and we'll come back either as day 2, or if we finish something early, we have less bugs because our quality is awesome, right? And we've budgeted for that amount of time. Maybe we pick it back up. Very often giving them that time box, they're able to accept that and say, okay, I'm good with a week, or I'm good with a sprint.
Yeah. And I would say also, it's an investment in the future of the application, right? If you don't take that time up front, and this is in any software development, if you just dive right in and you just start dragging components on the canvas and just immediately to hit whatever bullets are in your ticket, That's probably going to come back and bite you later on when you need to go make a change to it, when you realize it doesn't scale. So it's that initial investment of time is probably going to save you time in the long run when it comes to maintainability of what it is you develop.
Yeah, and that's one of the principles. I know that you and I have spoken a little bit about the Uncork Agile framework. One of the things that we really spent a lot of time on with all of the leaders of the groups in digital is how do we create both a culture of planning, right? Of drawing out the designs of the architecture, the designs of the configuration, the wireframes, making sure we have the user stories, or at least high levels of the user stories before we start. So that way we can get that planning. We've invested in it in that discovery phase and design phase. And then secondly, how do we create checkpoints throughout the application where we can bring in what I've always called a red team, a team that's slightly unfamiliar with the app, knows generally what it's supposed to do, but doesn't know the details of why we decided certain things, so that they can come in and review. And we want to do those, especially starting at the beginning, but throughout the build, so that way we're not waiting until the end to say, oh, we've got to rebuild the whole app because nobody looked at it and this decision that you made has downstream implications that you weren't thinking about. You were thinking about it works the way that it's supposed to. Somebody else coming in and going, hey, this design for this particular module could impact the performance down the road. So how do we pull those forward and again, limit our risk in each phase and be able to have those conversations with clients of we need to redo this or we need to rethink this even.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds a lot like what you were talking about earlier on a bigger scale, what you're talking about earlier in those first four about having other people, look at different configuration and de-risking and making sure that folks can enjoy their vacations, things like that. Having that fresh set of eyes, you've been so ingrained in a given problem for so long that you start to, you can't see the forest for the trees anymore, right? So that person coming in, they see the forest right away and can maybe sometimes see them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So those are learning organization, management quality, like caring about your people, openness, action orientedness, continuous improvement, continuous learning, all of that. So key elements of creating a high performing team. Now, how would you then? So now you've created that. That's your mantra. How do you ensure that that's continually being, you're living up to that as the team grows and as more projects come in and so on and so forth?
So I think it's a lot about promoting certain things and then going and measuring them. So we talked about quality. So we want to promote quality. We want to talk about what are the ways in which we are ensuring high quality applications, including testing strategy, the work that we're doing with Karen, unit testing through the UDLC tool, running the automated configuration analysis, looking at those guardrails. Now, how do we also measure that people are doing that? So even though we've said you should do this, how many times are people in the sprint and just running to that Wednesday sprint close, that Wednesday demo, and maybe haven't done what we would consider completing a ticket? And that includes the documentation, the handoff to QA, the unit testing, the overall test script. Where does it fall in that? They haven't had a full peer review. So how are we measuring that those things happen? So I would say we promote and measure quality. We're going to promote and measure the learning that's happening. So making sure that people are doing those certifications, making sure that people are showing up to different learning opportunities that we have and not getting so focused into their project that they're not learning something that could really help them. Innovation the same way. How do we promote people to innovate and then continue to document it, continue to build upon it, share it with others? And the last one, which I think is harder to measure, is teamwork. We want to promote that people are working together. Again, that two brains are better than one, fresh set of eyes really does make for a big difference. So we want to promote that teamwork, and that includes having leaders do things. We have on our team a monthly social. So getting people out of the configuration, out of the module designer for half an hour or an hour to play a game, we learn to make dumplings as a team, right? All of these different things help people feel like when they're stuck, when they're struggling with something, they have somebody to reach out to because they made dumplings together and had dinner and felt like, okay, now I know this person. It's not just a name on Slack that I'm constantly going to, and they must think I don't know what I'm doing because I've asked 2 questions in the last month,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, that's not how people think, but it is how people feel self-conscious about asking those questions. So we want to promote that because we only create a high-performing team if everyone is leveling up all the time.
Yeah. So you said there, when let's say you're finishing up a ticket, that you're doing all of the right things that defines completion, And I know I've seen in the past in a lot of development teams inside and outside of Uncork that, that initial estimation of something is the gut instinct is for people to say, okay, how long is it going to take me to build it? Right. But it sounds like, you're encapsulating more than just the build. So when it comes to like estimating your work and planning out your sprints and planning out the projects, what are, if you can just like talk more about what are those other inputs that go into that estimation? How do you factor that into the planning process such that, except building is only taking up some portion of the time I'm supposed to spend or is estimated to spend on a given piece of work?
Yeah. So when I think about story points, which throughout the industry we kind of use to determine how big something is, right? We may not know exactly, but we can put it into a box of a number of story points, right? I think about 2 things. Number 1 is how well known is it? Is it the DocuSign integration that we've done on probably 50% of our builds, if not more, right? That everyone kind of knows how to do it, as well as the size of it, right? So if we're comparing something that we think is, let's use an integration, right? So we've got an integration with DocuSign and we've got an integration with Slack that we've never done before, right? Until the Uncoder did it, right? We have these 2 integrations. Even though we think they're going to be about the same amount of work, I'm going to put more story points on the Slack integration because there's more unknowns. Does Uncork have all the capabilities that we need for that? Are there things that I'm going to need to ask the platform team for? Versus DocuSign, I know that I can grab that from the marketplace, pull it in, and probably be 90% of the way to that integration being done.
Sure. So,
So,
yeah, sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say, so I think there's a couple of things that we think about is, how big is it, but also how unknown, how complex is it? Are there spots that are going to trip somebody up?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to up or down those story points. So even though we think we know approximately how many story points somebody can do in a sprint, there's some that we may estimate at 5 story points, but ends up being 13 because we thought the complexity was going to be low to, teach somebody to do Adobe Sign instead of DocuSign. But it turns out it's a totally different workflow to integrate Adobe Sign into Uncork.
Right. And then I guess as you go forward, so let's say, okay, so the DocuSign, you're able to estimate it less because there's working examples in the marketplace, but there's also some of that working documentation. There's probably artifacts already that you can pass off to QA and things of those nature. So it sounds like by doing that up, if you do that on one project, you're probably going to reduce story points later on in other projects because the first person to do that work, let's say the Slack one, I'm the one, I get a 21-point ticket, which is, if you have a 21-point ticket, you probably want smaller tickets.
Smaller tickets.
I've got a 20, let's say I am the unlucky person who gets the 21-point ticket. The next time around, because then I've done the research, I've done the documentation, I've done a handoff already, it may be a completely different project that's going to benefit from my work to bring the next Slack integration story points down.
Exactly. And even, sometimes that documentation does pull forward, sometimes it doesn't, but at least in the implementation, it should shorten up.
Yeah.
Right. And then you do always have to write your unit tests. Those are always going to be unique to what you did, right? You have to document. And really, the handoff, if we are writing unit tests, the ticket is very clear in terms of user stories, and we're doing, documentation on our own. QA should be able to grab that, quickly test it, know that it's right, both by using those unit tests themselves, as well as kind of looking at how does this fit in the overall flow.
Right. And that's so this is all kind of coming back to me. I've always found it so interesting, with something like code, this architecture platform is, what we'll often say in that regard is, if let's say someone on your team finds a security issue, right? Or a client does a security scan and finds an issue, Uncork addresses that in the platform and it benefits everybody else. So there's like that layer of this, hive mind almost, and this hive improvement that you get at a platform layer. But it sounds like with the processes and the structures and the framework you put in place, you've elevated that up to the next level where that same benefit is happening in the configuration side of things, where when you do it for one, everyone is benefiting from it also.
That's the goal, and that's why we have things internally to share what we're doing. Our team meeting normally has a 15-minute walkthrough of some configuration, whether it's from the team, whether it's from other internal creators talking about what they did. I know you came in to talk about some of the work you were doing in configuration and work through with the team how they could do similar things. We also, have, when the new grid components came out, we sat down and had presentations on good use cases for them. Each one individually was part of a lunch and learn. So that way people are constantly learning what's being done by the team. They're able to then either take it all in right there, use it on their next project, or be able to go back to either a video or a person who presented and say, did you think about this? Can you walk through this with me? You seem to really understand this new component. How can I learn that?
Yeah.
Right? How do I figure out that there's new components coming out? How do I start to play with them? What did you do to play with them? Sometimes, it's overwhelming to just be given, here's a new component. It's a grid, figure out a use case, right? So having somebody that you can kind of bounce those ideas off of is really, really important to that.
Right. Cool. So you've used the term Uncork Agile Framework a few times, and a lot of what we're talking about, I see the parallels to my life before Uncork, and before I had learned the beauty of no code. But so maybe can you tell us a little bit more about the Uncork Agile Framework, but with a lens of how it is the same or different from maybe standard Agile, and parallels between how you'd run a standard engineering team versus a codeless engineering team.
Sure. So in terms of what the Uncork Agile Framework is taking the beginnings of Agile, or the ideals of Agile, right? We're going to have sprints. They're always going to look about the same. We're going to have all those Agile ceremonies, but also we're going to deliver on those sprints. So when a sprint is over, that configuration, that code should be ready to be promoted, right? So looking at the last 4 years of Uncork digital professional services, building applications, and what are the ways that we were most successful? So thinking about when we had the requirements, maybe not fully defined up front, but at least the high-level epics defined up front. We were able to sit down with a solutions architect and a UX designer and really design out what this application is going to look like based on those epics and high-level requirements. We were able to even drill down into some of the modules, and are there specific modules that are going to be reused over and over and over again, and we're going to import them everywhere? Are we going to use a workflow? So doing those things up front, and then during the sprint, making sure that we are constantly producing high quality work through reviews, through pre-designing the work that we're going to do, and then delivering it through the QA process, right? And working as a team to get that done. As things come up, finding the right people, talking about them, getting them resolved, and continuing to move. So that's the idea of the Uncork Agile framework, is to take the best parts of Agile, the best things that we've done as Uncork Digital, and put them together so not only can our teams use them, but external teams can use them. Sometimes we find the clients or the systems integrators, they may not have delivered a ton in Uncork. They may not have this knowledge already of what makes a project good. How do I set up my team? Those types of things. So that's also a part of that Uncork Agile framework.
Right.
Now, when I look at traditional Agile versus what we've done, I've already named one of the things that I think is a big difference, is sometimes Agile ends up becoming Agile fall, right? We start with an Agile mindset. If we're going to run sprints, this is what we're going to deliver each sprint, at least at a high level. It's going to take us 6 weeks to deliver this whole thing. And when it gets shown to a client or the business user or whoever's going to use it in week 4 for the first time, they hate everything about it, right? We didn't fully understand the requirements. Part of what we've done in Uncork Agile Framework is make that a weekly or a sprintly kind of show and tell. We have a demo every single time. There's a sign off to it saying, yes, this is ready. Keep moving. We're going into the next sprint. So we're never 3/4 of the way done with the project when the client sees it for the first time and goes, hey, I thought it was all going to be red. Why is it blue? Right? And we got to start from scratch. So those are big differences that we're seeing. It also incorporates things, we do our reviews as part of our sign off to go to QA rather than at a merge point right now. Could that change in the future? Absolutely. But because of that, we are slightly different than a traditional engineering team, right? Where everything is merged off of its branch when it's ready to go, but doesn't necessarily have that QA. So having those differences, because of the way that Uncork works, the way that we work in Designer, does mean that we kind of have a slightly different view of how the team should run than a traditional engineering team.
Right. So you were saying, showing those sprint demos, that is one of the most important parts of Agile, right? Is to get that feedback iteratively so you don't go in that very waterfall approach where you work for a long time, you show it, and it's not. That was, I think, the primary problem that Agile came in to address, right? So, but we were talking about this the other day, though, what that invites sometimes is then all of this feedback from the client, but then the expectation that that's going to be done in line with everything else that was already planned, and not really realizing there has to still be trade-offs between, doing the feedback you want versus the next thing that we were going to do if not for this feedback. What are some strategies you would give to people? That's what I always found to be one of the hardest things to manage when I manage more Agile teams. What are some strategies or advice you'd give to folks in how to balance the feedback from the iterations versus the next planned iteration?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that we can do. I think one part is always having a prioritized backlog. So knowing that it's a new item, being able to tag it maybe in Jira, keeping it still in what the priority order is, but also being able to say to a client, hey, if you put this in, we've estimated it at 5 points. We know that you've now made it priority number 1. You cannot do business in the state of Texas unless you have this thing, right? We've all agreed it was a miss, but we're going to put it in because we know you need it. That's going to bump out priority number 10, right? That's the last thing on our backlog. Are you okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? We want to make sure that there's always a decision maker from that client who's able to make those calls and say, yes, we're okay with that, or no, we're not okay with it, but I can talk to the team and we're going to push the date by a week. right? And we can kind of start to make sure that they understand those consequences, because we can put it at the bottom of the backlog, still get it done.
Yeah.
But if you need it now for that launch, we're going to push that much higher.
Yeah. To me, it sounds like the key to all of that is transparency.
Yes.
Right? Like, and it's the theme in my head was coming up as you were talking through so many of those different pieces, like showing the progress as frequently as possible, being transparent about where you are, being transparent about what the backlog is. Like, you're not hiding the work that you have to do. You're not hiding how difficult you think it is. You're putting it out there. At any point, someone can come look at it and know exactly what's left, know exactly the order that you're planning to do it, or at least the priority. And sometimes the order may vary on a combination of priority, difficulty, but like, you have it there. It's a known quantity of things. It's a known priority of things. So when those things come in, it's like, look, you see it, right? We're not trying to hoodwink you here and buy ourselves time. Like, this is the reality.
Absolutely. And, you know this, but many don't. I played an engagement manager role before I joined Uncork. One of the best pieces of advice I got when I joined Uncork was you have to be transparent. Clients are much more upset if you're not transparent with them than if you have the hard conversation, level with them and say, hey, we thought this was going to be a 5-point story item. It ended up being 8. That means we didn't get to this. Is it something, it was the lowest priority? Is it still highest priority for the next sprint? Or now that you've seen it, do you think it drops lower? Right? Having those tough conversations as an engineer, as a engagement manager with either the development team that you're working with, or with the client is important. And maybe even just saying, hey, I was assigned this ticket. We thought it was 5, turned out to be 8. I had to drop a 3-point ticket. Can anyone else on the team, did they finish early? Can they grab this?
Yeah.
Can we finish out the sprint still? So again, that transparency internally too, of not hiding like, hey, I didn't get my work done. Just saying, I'm stuck on something that ended up being bigger. Can you help me? Often somebody can pick it up. Maybe not always, but often somebody might be able to grab that ticket because one of theirs was smaller.
Yeah. It's so important, like you said, internally first. So like, for folks who are, in the app engineering organization, to escalate that to yourself and other folks running certain projects, the engagement managers, and then back to the client. Because if you wait on that, the problem doesn't go away just because you're not talking about it. It's only going to snowball and get bigger. And then by the time you actually bring it up, it's way worse than it was if you had brought it up earlier on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that goes back to that communication, goes back to being open and action oriented, the leadership, all of those, and the learning, right? You learn that the first time, you learn, oh, this did not work, trying to hide it, and you do something different next time.
Yeah. And I think, it does go back to that management quality thing you're talking about, because you have to create an environment where your teams are comfortable coming to you and saying that, because they know that they're going to be met with support, right? Like, if I raise my hand and I say, I'm not going to get this ticket done, it was way harder than I thought, or X, Y, or Z reason, that whoever it is, whether it's my manager or the lead on my project, is not going to punish me for that, but we're going to work as a team to find the right solution, whether we can handle it internally or have to go to the customer and talk through the solution with them. You're going to be met with support versus be met with, like, again, punishment.
Yeah, I had one of my direct reports we were doing a bit of a review just ourselves and talking. And one of the things that they said was, you have very high standards, but the second anyone asks for help, your sleeves are rolled up and you're ready to join them. And that is what I want for my whole team, right? I want them to hold themselves to very high standards, but the second they need help, ask, because they know the people around them are going to jump in, join them, rally behind them, and get it done.
Yeah. And I think it's important too for managers. Like, I know as I've kind of moved up in the project hierarchy or the organization hierarchy, I relish the opportunity to roll my sleeves up, because I need to see what my team is going through. I need to feel the pains they're going through. I need to be really connected to the platform, the technology, the use case, whatever it is, to be better at my job and to continue to grow on my own. So, sometimes I love when somebody comes to me with a problem, because then I get to put my problem solver hat on and do something different and stay aware.
And I think, you and I have talked about this. There's now the trade-off of we're not in the configuration as much. I'm slower than many people in my team. So if something comes in and I'm like, oh, I know that I can do that. I know how to do it. I'm still slower than they are. So how do I balance hey, it'll take somebody on my team 15 minutes, but for me, it's probably going to take me half an hour, still get it done. I want to understand their pain points, but I also know that we need to care about velocity, right? And how quickly can we turn things around for a client?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I love having guests on this Twitch as much as possible, because then I get to learn all the things that I don't necessarily maybe see as much firsthand anymore. Although I definitely try to keep my sleeves as far up as possible these days of uncoding. But so you mentioned velocity, and you were talking earlier about measuring some of those metrics, or some of those promotion things that you're promoting, like the quality, the learning, the innovation, teamwork. I think that's what they were. So, but some of those things sound a little hard to measure, and then obviously, just in support of your continuous improvement, you need to understand the metrics to know how to improve. So, maybe talk a little bit more about how you measure the success against some of those principles that you talked to us about earlier.
Yeah, so I think the two most common and the two probably easiest for us to measure are quality and velocity. And I think those go hand in hand, right? If you're going really, really fast, but your quality is really, really low, it doesn't really help me, right? Or if you're going really, really slow, but your quality is really, really high, it's also hard, right? Because the project needs to move and needs to have a certain velocity. So everyone should have really, really high quality, but the velocity needs to move to that middle ground at least, right, in order to reach that quality. But again, we want to measure those kind of hand in hand, be able to say, hey, Nick's got really, really high velocity and really, really high quality. That's great. Like, what is he doing? How can we get other people to follow his lead on that? The second thing that I really like to measure is adherence to best practices and tools that we have. So within Uncork Agile Framework, we've laid this out, as well as something we've talked about in UDLC, as well as just in general. We want people to run the automated configuration analysis tool. And we also want to see them fixing things that come out of that automated configuration analysis tool. It doesn't help if you run it every 2 weeks and completely ignore it. So we want to measure those things. Those are things that, I've worked with our data analyze camp to help us measure and see where we have gaps. Why are there gaps? How can we help close those? But also looking at other best practices that we want to measure. So unit testing coverage, right? That's another one. We have the UDLC tool for unit testing, came out about a year ago. Have people adopted it? Do they have enough coverage? Do they understand what the right coverage is so that we can measure that? And then the last one, which kind of is really hard for us to measure, is satisfaction in their job, satisfaction in how much they're innovating versus how much they feel like they're just delivering. And then also how well the teams are working together, right? That one, it tends to be very often as a manager, a little bit of gut feel. And it's something that I've looked at of, are there things that we can measure, whether it's even something like a roll-off report of how did these people work together? Can they rate how well they work together as a team? Satisfaction, we get a lot of from the surveys that Uncork does across the board. Innovation, we kind of look at what's being produced. Are we creating accelerators? Are we creating new patterns? Are we documenting them? But we also want to check in with people and use that gut, right? I think as managers, we all kind of know what's happening on our team, even when we don't know what's happening on our team. You can hear in the way people talk about things when they're unhappy, when they're stressed, when they're really enjoying what they're doing. They get that big smile and like the words kind of trip over each other. You know that that's happening, right? So using that gut check, but also finding the time to meet with people that maybe don't share with you, right? Finding the people, especially as the team grows, the people that, hey, I haven't spoken to you in a couple months. You still feeling good? You really liked this project. Did you like it all the way through? Or was it that, in the beginning, things were really good. Everyone was having a party. And at the end, it turned into like absolute chaos run to the finish.
Yeah.
So, understanding where people are at.
Cool. So I want to jump back to the first one you said was like the two main ones being quality and velocity, right? So let's say, Dara has really high quality and she's really fast, but in the traditional like pick two triangle, that also means Dara is really expensive, right? So when you think about, cost in there, and I know that we've talked before about how Uncork kind of eliminates the need to pick between the three. Is cost, both in terms of people and projects or technology or whatever you want to encapsulate inside of that, does that factor in at all in some of those metrics and where you weight things?
So I think yes and no. So we do have target velocities per level within our teams, right? So somebody who's very new to a project, very new to Uncork, their velocity is going to be lower than somebody who's been working in Uncork for 4 years, right? So while we're saying high velocity, we're talking about high velocity per level, right? We want to give people measurements that actually apply to them. Um, it does level out as we start to get up in the higher levels and what role you're playing on a project. I think the other thing is we have resource mixes, right? So while we do have somebody that's very high quality, very high velocity, they might be slightly more expensive, but they're also going to get your project done in less time than if you had people who were less expensive, slightly lower quality, or slightly lower velocity. It's going to take more time for your project to be done. You may end up paying more overall. So with that, we try to do a mix. And this goes back to the learning as well. Try to have somebody who's very senior playing that app engineering lead. They are leading the other app engineers on that project. They are making sure their work is of high quality, that they're getting their sprint work done on time, right? So in addition to having that high quality, high velocity, they're also helping out the others on their team who may be moving slightly slower, may need somebody to kind of show them where they didn't know that they needed a null case in their unit test to make sure that the quality was there. So they're learning from that experience of the more seasoned person on the project. That also means we are sharing knowledge all the time. So that more experienced person can, when a ticket comes out, if they know somebody on their team has never done a DocuSign integration, we're going back to that one, they can say, make sure you check out the marketplace as a comment in that ticket, and that person, instead of struggling to try to set up DocuSign for the first time by themselves, can pull that down and learn from their experience, knowing that there is something there to reuse. So we do want to create a mix of people at different levels. Number one, so we train people up, we share the knowledge. But number two, so that we don't end up with a client that is like, why is it so expensive to work in Uncork? Because they have 4 people who started with us in 2017, 2018, who are the best of the best, right? But they also cost a lot of money because they're very senior resources. Try to create those mixes so that we also spread that knowledge.
Yeah. All right, awesome. So we're, as you predicted, we were going to have no problem filling up a full hour's worth of content, and I know we can continue to go on and on and on. But in the interest of, you have a very full plate of 46, I think 47 app engineers. You said that you're leading. So I want to just maybe wrap it up with one last question, and just to get your thoughts on. So for folks who are coming, either new into Uncork, but more importantly, new into the Uncork company, but new into Uncork, like, what would you recommend people do to to get started, whether it's joining a team of other app engineers, but for the folks who don't have the luxury of joining, your organization, how they can still get some of the benefits of the things that you do to prepare your engineers for everything that you just enlightened us with.
Yeah, so I think a few things. The first would be turn everything possible into a learning opportunity, right? If you get a few minutes with somebody more senior, ask them questions. If you're having a coffee chat with somebody that's known Uncork already, make sure that you're not only talking to them and getting to know them as a person, but you're also asking them, what are they doing? What are they working on? How can I get involved? Right? Set up lunch and learns if there's a topic you're interested. People like talking about what they're doing. So take advantage of that. I think the second thing is, knowing your team. So I know my team is very competitive. Um, we've found that out doing scavenger hunts, doing, little competitions. So I turn things into mini competitions, all in good fun. Um, we will do things like who's going to be the first person to get certified in all three, their associate, professional, and expert configurator. Who's going to do it the fastest? Who's going to, um, volunteer to interview, right? We've done all these offshore interviews. Who's going to do the most interviews? Who's going to write the longest review of something, write the most best practices, answer the most community questions? Whatever it is, know what motivates the team and use that to teach yourself something, right? So we've done badging, we've done these little competitions. So that way people feel like they can get involved and teach something or share something that maybe they weren't quite ready to share. They would have been a little bit nervous about doing it, but because they know they're going to get a badge for going on Twitch in our community platform, they may be more willing to do it. So finding ways to motivate people to share what they know as well is really, really going to help them. The other thing I would say is take advantage of community. There are a ton of resources there, both from activities you can do, like the competitions, the hackathon. There are also places to ask questions, make suggestions, write up something you think is a best practice, read those best practices and start a conversation about them. All of those things are at your fingertips. And I know that sometimes it can be overwhelming because there's so much there, but just start with a small question.
Yeah. Wonderful. So I hear a lot, and so much of that is applicable, whether you're at Uncork or not. Gamification and a little healthy competition never hurt anyone. And you mentioned certifications in there. So is it on Academy? Is that right? Academy.uncork.com?
On Academy. And you can get there, I believe, through community as well.
Beautiful. So community is the center of the universe. You've seen Danny come on. We've done a few sessions on that. Make sure to watch any old session on community if you want to learn more, because obviously, in the words of Dara, it's a super valuable resource for anyone coming in to be an Uncork engineer. So definitely check that out, folks. Thank you for joining. Dara, thank you so much for coming on. As expected, this was a wonderful conversation, and I'm so happy to see you in this role, leading all these people, after having worked with you for so long at the company and having had such success working alongside you. It's great to see and hear everything you've, been able to accomplish and set up in your time in this role. So, congrats on that. Thank you again. And, I'll let you sign us off. Any last words you want to give folks before we call it a day?
Just thank you so much for having me, and keep learning, keep trying new things, and you'll build amazing applications.
All right, great. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next Tuesday, 3:00. Thanks, Dara, and have a good afternoon.